This is Professor Carpenter at Valencia College. Welcome to today's session, Analyzing Comparison and Contrast Essays. Here are our lesson objectives. We will analyze comparison and contrast essays. We'll look at organization and theme, thesis statements, the structure of introductions, transitions, and conclusions. For this session, we'll look at two essays in 75 readings plus. Grant and Lee, A Study in Contrast by Bruce Catton, and Two Views of the Mississippi by Mark Twain. Let's look first at Grant and Lee, A Study in Contrast by Bruce Catton. The author of this essay was an American historian and journalist, best known for his books on the American Civil War. Here is how Catton organized his essay. Notice that he began with an introduction and then moved into contrasting Lee and Grant. He then discussed the similarities between the two generals, including similar fighting styles and character traits, daring and resourcefulness. The thesis statement is this. They were two strong men, these oddly different generals, and they represented the strengths of two conflicting currents that, through them, had come into final collision. As you read the essay, Catton clearly describes the similarities between both Lee and Grant. Both were two distinguished generals, both had passion for what they were fighting for, both were fearless and fought without reservation, both could inspire their soldiers to fight, both fought in the Mexican War, and both went to West Point. Catton also discusses the differences between the two. Lee, aristocracy, was in the old-fashioned ideal, and he grew up with and stood for a noble way of life. He believed in tradition and personified that with English knights and country squires, while Grant believed in democracy, hope and future of the nation. He believed that status was not just bestowed upon a person, they had to earn it. You can see the differences here in inequality. Lee supported inequality in social structure. He believed that only wealthy landowners could be leaders because they had a stake in their community, while Grant supported equality, believing that any man could become a leader, provided that he had the ability, skills, and was able to assume the position. While Lee was satisfied with the status quo, Grant was dissatisfied with the status quo, believing in democracy and competition. While Lee was an aristocrat from a family of landowners, Grant was a middle-class man from humble beginnings in the mountains. So notice how Catton uses transitions. For example, here he begins by describing Lee's attitudes towards society, and then he uses the transition, the Westerner, on the other hand, to begin contrasting Grant's attitude towards society. Notice how the conclusion reinforces and restates the original thesis statement. So, the conclusion states that two great Americans, Grant and Lee, were very different, yet under everything very much alike. Their encounter at Appomattox was one of the great moments of American history. Let's look next at Two Views of the Mississippi by Mark Twain. Most of us are familiar with Twain's works, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The essay we'll be discussing is about his life as a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi. Twain became a riverboat pilot and studied the Mississippi. Learning this trade was a valuable acquisition. Not only did a pilot receive good wages and enjoy universal respect, but he was absolutely free and self-sufficient. Twain said, quote, "A pilot in those days was the only unfettered and entirely independent human being that lived in the earth." Now, why did Mark Twain stop being a riverboat pilot? Actually, the Civil War stopped his work, and this essay that he wrote focuses on comparing how he saw the Mississippi River before he became a riverboat pilot and after. So in his introduction, and we'll look now at the organization of the essay, he states his insight. "I had made a valuable acquisition, learning how to be a riverboat pilot, but I had lost something too. I had lost something, which could never be restored to me while I lived. In the essay, we find out what the valuable acquisition was and what was the something that could never be restored. His thesis statement can be summed up as, although mastering his profession provided him with a valuable skill, in doing so he lost the ability to appreciate the beauty of its natural setting. And as you read the essay, consider how Twain organizes the essay. He begins with the introduction and thesis, and then he moves into his description of his view of the Mississippi before he became a riverboat pilot, and then he discusses how he viewed the Mississippi after he became a riverboat pilot. He concludes by reinforcing his thesis statement. For example, in the first view column, you see how romantic, graceful, and beautiful he saw the river when he was new. So this is before he became an experienced riverboat pilot. He saw the Mississippi, the deep red and gold colors, solitary floating black log, sparkling slanting mark, graceful lines and silver streaks. And in the second view, you see that he saw these signs as signs of something a riverboat pilot would notice or need. So the deep red and gold colors means the sun indicates wind tomorrow, or the solitary floating black log might mean a rising river. Here, opalescent boiling and tumbling rings might mean a dissolving bar and changing channel. So before he became a riverboat pilot, he had an innocent appreciation of the river. He had a more negative view of the river after becoming a pilot, saying that all the grace, beauty, and poetry had gone out of the river for him, and he had lost his ability to appreciate it. Here he's emphasizing his thesis that, although mastering his profession provided him with a valuable skill, in doing so he lost the ability to appreciate the beauty of its natural setting. Twain uses figurative language throughout the essay, and here are some examples. This essay is relevant to our own personal experience. For example, think about experiences that have changed from the first time you experienced them to now. For example, compare your view of Disney World as a child versus working at Disney, or seeing McDonald's or going to McDonald's as a child versus working at a fast food restaurant. So this is the end of this lecture, analyzing our readings of comparison and contrast essays from 75 Readings Plus. Have a great week.